spooky people, and welcome to In the Maw of Thanatos, first video of 2023. And of course it's late. Would it really be an In the Maw of Thanatos episode if it was on time? I'm Mike, and I'm sorry it's been so long since my last video, but as you can see, there've been some changes here at Studio Maw. As time goes on, I'm hoping to have this all filled with things, so don't worry, you're not just going to be staring at a blue abyss behind me. There will be things going up there eventually, but I just wanted to get a video out there because it's been a while. I'm sorry for any bleeps that appear in this episode. With YouTube's updated community guidelines, it's now the responsibility of content creators to make sure that there are no bad words on the internet. Come on, even Marvel gets to say shit at least once in each film. And they're not exactly R-rated.
You juggling thunder!
In this episode, I'll be diving into a bit of British zombie found footage. So grab your camera and listen out for flies as we look at the Zombie Diaries. In true found footage tradition, we start with a wraparound segment as we follow a group of soldiers storming a farm somewhere in the UK.
You juggling thunder!
Not much goes on because the farm is abandoned, and the segment ends with a pair of hazmat-clad science guys taking samples from a corpse. We then move on to some generic world-building news reports.
Rioting and looting has been reported in some major cities, but governments have been playing down the scale of the
originally stated that incidents in Asia were isolated cases and posed no
United
significant
Kingdom's
threat.
preparation for a pandemic has been severely criticised in the press, with official figures grossly underestimating the spread
What I
of
want to
infection.
know is what are the government doing right now, at this moment, to prevent an outbreak in this country?
Followed by Diary 1, The Outbreak. The first real characters that we meet are some journalists reporting on an outbreak of bird flu. They kind of hint that that's what it is, but as to the validity of that, who's to say? They are Vanessa, the producer, Leanne, the host, Matt, the cameraman, and Andy. I'm not quite sure what Andy's job is. They get interviews from a variety of people, with the statements and the scenes feeling more than a little familiar.
Well, listening to what's been said about it, it doesn't seem that serious.
Do you think the government are doing enough to prevent the virus from coming to this country?
I don't honestly know what they could do to prevent it, but perhaps they're not taking it seriously enough. Maybe they wait too late before they act.
There's a bit of behind the scenes banter stuff, and then they do a final interview with the teacher who expresses the contradictory nature of the information that they're being provided by the government.
He told us that the molecular structure of this virus was very similar to that of bird flu. Well, I found out that the virus is similar to, say, for example, the common cold. So we are no further forward on that. We've been told so many different things. We don't know where we are and where we stand on this.
How did they know? They return to the office and Andy has a chat with a colleague who tells him that New York has fallen and the flu-like virus has now reached London.
Something big has happened in New York. They've been trying to hush it up, but the news broke to the networks a couple of hours ago. The thing is, it looks now as if it's hit London too.
For no reason other than having an interview scheduled outside of the city, the crew leave. Getting stuck in traffic, the group have a realistic and awkward bit of work chit-chat.
Oh, the hustle and bustle.
All the phallic symbolism.
When they finally arrive at the farm, they brief Leanne on the questions that she's to ask the farmer that they're there to interview, only to find that the house is actually locked up and no one is home, supposedly. They argue for a bit and discover that the nearby village is also deserted, so they decide to go back to the farm once they discover that London has been put into a lockdown.
They put some kind of quarantine around 3 parts of the city.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and all the hospitals. They've been completely overrun with new cases. It looks like Bill was right. All the news bulletins, they're telling people to avoid London.
Oh yeah, the car breaks down as well, so they're kind of stuck there. There's still nobody home, so they decide to break in. And when Mr. West, lol, see what you did there, doesn't reply to their calls, they check the phones and find them dead. And soon after, the power dies too. And then...
It's coming from directly above us, I swear it is.
No, they would have heard us. They must have heard us.
Listen.
Investigating the house, Andy and Matt come up empty until they reach the final room they haven't checked upstairs. Of course. Opening the door, they see that Mr. West isn't doing so well, and then they hear a noise that will become all too annoyingly familiar. Oh no! A zombie! Fleeing the house, our intrepid journalists have to run through a farmyard full of the Walking Dead.
We're gonna have to go through them. Just stay close.
Managing to escape, they end up lost in the woods and arguing around a campfire. Cut to Diary 2, The Scavengers, 1 month later. John, the cameraman for this vignette, discusses the merits and dangers of going into a nearby town with Greg and his wife Elizabeth. Oops, their being married doesn't get revealed until later. Oh well, they eventually decide that they don't actually have a choice, given that they're running low on food and other supplies. But first they stop at a picnic spot to recce the town.
Is it dead?
The film tries to trick us with the dead body and the playing of those fly sounds.
There's your answer.
But after they return to it after some rather pointed comments about America and guns.
What a shame we don't live in a more gun-friendly society, like yours.
The thing has got up and is on the prowl. Smart move, zombie. Oh, never mind. We then jump to deserted, litter-strewn streets. I like this. It looks good.
Did you ever imagine such a sight?
Yeah, everyone's gone away.
Raiding a computer repair shop, priorities, Greg attempts to repair the radio that they just so happen to have. Elizabeth and Matt go off to search the abandoned streets, looking for supplies, and eventually they find a mini-market. They return to Greg and find that he's repaired the radio and is listening to an indistinct, distant voice. Afterwards, they drive to the shop and John thinks he sees something, so he shows the others the tape.
Were you recording?
Yeah.
Check it.
That was definitely something.
We've got to get out of here right now.
Finally! A found footage film that makes sense when people show the footage of something they've seen to other people. I hate it when they show it again for us. We were watching the film. We didn't forget. Anyway, they raid the shop until the sound of breaking glass sends them running back to their car and into a street full of the dead, who are actually some distance away. But oh no, do you hear that? Flies. Sneaky. Greg kills it, and then they drive away. Moving on to Diary 3, The Survivors. I won't rattle off all the names in this diary because there are quite a few people. I'll just mention the important ones as I get to them. Our final group is shooting zombies in a field. Where are all these guns coming from? Aren't we in the UK? When the massacre is over, they decide that they're going to burn the bodies later, and when James, our point of view for this segment, goes to nudge one with his foot, he's reprimanded by Susan about the dangers of contamination.
Don't touch them! It could be contagious.
If it was contagious, we'd all have it by now.
Well, I don't like the idea of you getting any of their blood on you. Especially not on your feet, that could bring the infection into the house.
Susan is the big boss of the farm. Going back to the homestead, they use bleach to clean their shoes of any potential contamination. Except Gokay, who gets yelled at for not following protocol.
Hey!
Hey, Gokay!
Your feet, please.
James then has an attempt at some commentary, but it just comes across as trite. His words, the Twin Towers, life, and just wasting your life on pointless things. I don't know. I can see what they were trying to do, but it just comes across with all the subtlety and nuance of a brick, or maybe the writing of Black Christmas 2019.
I just didn't realise at the time, you know, how much I was just wasting life, you know. I sort of know what the people in the Twin Towers felt like. And I know that sounds trite.
We then cut to later that night. I think it's the same day. Anyway, the group are gathered around the dinner table. Gokay is making obviously unwanted advances towards Anna, while Susan and Jeff discuss supplies and the radio. There's another zombie attack, and Gokey is missing. Well, until he turns up in a van.
Jake! Go get a torch! Mackenzie, go with him! Check the front of the farm! Come on!
Susan berates him because, you know, risk of contamination. Only for Amin, her husband, boyfriend, to show up the next day with blood all up the side of his van.
That looks almost as bad as our one.
Funny that. The chapter ends with the group deciding that they need to find out where the zombies are coming from, with the regular attacks, and them being pretty remote. We visit each diary once more, including the wraparound, and then the film ends. With some twists here and there. The Zombie Diaries was released in 2006, right in the middle of the resurgence of zombie and found footage films. Yep, it's hard to believe, but there was a time when zombie films were somewhat difficult to come by, outside of Romero and Italian splatter movies. So what I mean by that is you couldn't just go to Shudder and do a quick search for zombie and okay. What I actually mean by that is that you couldn't go to Prime and type in zombie movies in the search term and come up with, just looking at the first page, all of this. So yeah, you had to actually go to a shop and hope that they had them in stock, or order them through the store, or pay way over the odds for films that were really poorly made. Now you're going to get two different currencies here just because of the type of information that the internet has provided me with, but the film was made for the low price of £8,100 and brought in $2 million. Not bad. It was written and directed by Kevin Gates and Michael Bartlett, both of whom went on to direct the sequel, with only Gates writing. Gates later went on to direct The Paranormal Diaries. I'm sensing a theme here, with Bartlett going on to make The Treehouse, a film that's been on my to-watch list for a while. They decided to go with fairly unknown actors at the time, even asking them to improvise entire sequences of the film, which probably explains some of the awkward, hokey bits.
We're on camera.
Is that what it is? Could you?
Should I ask what you people are doing out here with that thing?
We're making a documentary.
Out in the woods at this time? Sounds like my kind of film.
The whole thing was shot on weekends between July and November of 2005, the best time of year for weather in the UK. It was shown at Fright Fest in 2007, where they also attempted to break the world record for the most zombie walk participants. They didn't do it. Cast-wise, as already mentioned, they were pretty much all unknowns, with only really Victoria Summer, Leanne, going on to appearing anything noteworthy, except it wasn't horror related, so I'm not going to mention it. This was her film debut, and she's not in it too much, to be fair. James Fisher, Jeff, did appear in a few horror films afterwards, mostly zombie related. Anyway, the acting is fair. It's a little bit corny in places, with the line delivery coming across as a tad stilted, probably due to the improvisation that the cast had to do. But for a low budget film like this, it's not actually that bad. In terms of effects, they're pretty good. The zombies look believably dead, and the gore, for what little there is decent. Since this is a film more about the characters, the dead aren't around all that much, to be honest. It's just a shame that the script and the improv wasn't quite strong enough to carry the idea. There is one annoying aspect to the film, and that's the sound design, or more specifically, the fly sounds. Again, I get what they were trying to do, and I suppose it does make it more realistic. Dead folks would be swarming with flies after all, but it's the same loop over and over again, and while at the beginning it does help to build tension, by the end you'll be tired of hearing it spoil the chance of a good scare. Now I want to discuss something that I don't normally talk about on these episodes, and that's the posters or the cover art for the DVDs. I mean, look at them. Just look at them. Could they be more disingenuous? I know you shouldn't really judge a book by its cover, but f*** me. The disparity between what you should expect from the contents and what you actually get is enormous. It's pretty mind-blowing, really, that they managed to get away with it. It wouldn't normally annoy me, but they go f*** hard. The poster that I've had up this entire video is the one that I fell for. It's a cool poster, but does any of it actually happen within the film? It's downright deceitful. Seriously, how do companies get away with this level of false advertising? To be honest, it isn't really the fault of anyone involved in the actual creation of the film. It's just a studio doing what studios do, unfortunately. Like I said, cool picture. This one at least. I'd have it on my wall. Not so much this one. The real problem I have with it is it's just not indicative of the actual product, and it kind of tricks you into buying it expecting to see some huge epic fight between humans and zombies, when in actual fact, as I mentioned in the story bit, it's more focused on characters than zombies, so none of this huge fight that you expect to see based on the cover art ever actually occurs. The closest you get is the raids by the zombies on the farm, but that's only a couple of times, and it's still not the swarming that you see on this. I mean, I know, I get it. They've got to try and sell a product and make it look exciting and interesting, but at a certain point, you just distance yourself too far from the source material and it ceases to have anything to do with it, which I think is the problem that these posters have. They kind of become something, they feel like they're for a different film once you've actually watched the film, and that's a bit of a problem for me. But that's where we are with it. What can you do? So, would I recommend the Zombie Diaries? I don't really know with this one. Maybe? I used to love this film when it first came out. I mean, it's not the best, and a lot of the tropes and such are kind of played out by now. I know it's a film from before we'd seen them over and over again, and if you'd asked me in 2006, I would have said definitely. But now, at a point where people are finding found footage and zombie films kind of boring and kitsch almost, I just can't recommend it with any real conviction. And while it's not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination, it just isn't original or special enough to really recommend to anyone who isn't a zombie fanatic, like I was, and still kind of am. As I said, there was a time when zombie films were hard to find, so this really did come out at the right time when the subgenre was gaining popularity again. It just doesn't have the legs to keep it relevant, even though the ending is pretty good. And bleak. And nihilistic. I just don't think it does enough with the idea or the premise to really keep you engaged. And this watch through for this review, I was kind of bored, which really sucks and is a shame because, like I said, in 2006, I loved this film, but maybe that was largely because there weren't a lot of other options, whereas now there are way too many, some would argue. I wouldn't, but some would. If you enjoyed this episode and want to listen to me talk to two elderly emos about more found footage films, then you should listen to the January episode of Headlong into Monsters, where we discussed Grave Encounters, Deadstream, and Wreck, as well as a bunch of other stuff. I had fun, and I think you will too. So give it a listen. Link in the description. Please comment your thoughts down below, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Remember to stay safe, stay weird, and most importantly, stay spooky. Thank you for watching. Bye bye. Thunder.